Hi, I'm going to show you the best way to create a nice even gather. I'm using OUSM Designs free Cecilia puff tee, so you can go to OUSMdesigns.com and click on free patterns to grab yours if you don't have one. And here's how we're going to get started. Now I'm working on a knit and I'm going to be gathering in between 2 points. It's a relatively short gather, but the same principle applies whether you're gathering knits, wovens, really long stretches. This is even better for. So here we go. First, what you're going to want to do is transfer your dots. In my case, I'm using pins for markings to mark my dots, but you can use whatever. There is a plethora of marking tools available for you. The seam allowance I'm going to attach this sleeve at is 3/8. So I want to break the difference between those two seam allowances, and I'm going to put in 2 lines of gathering stitches. Now, sewing machines are all a little bit different, but on my machine, the best go is to lengthen my stitch up to a 4. You may want to test that a little on yours, but typically I just lengthen my stitch all the way out. Gathering or basting stitches are temporary, so you're not going to back stitch, and you want nice long tails on them. So my seam allowance is at 3/8, so I've sewn 2 stitching lines in between my 2 dots, one at 1/4 inch and one at 5/8, so that my seam allowance is right in between the 2 of those. So if you have a different seam allowance on your project than 3/8, that's what you're aiming for. One on the outside of your either side of your seam allowance. Now that I have these stitches in, what I'm going to do is grab the tails of my bobbin thread. So you want to always gather from your bobbin side and just work your gathers in. Now in my case, I am going to just gather it up nice and snug and work from there. You're best to over gather. You can always release out gathers. That's easy right up until you have them stitched in, as opposed to under gathering. It's a little bit of a pain once you start pinning and realize that it's not tight enough and you have to go back and try to work it together. So for this example, just grab your bobbin threads, and I like to work from both sides. Kind of helps you get a little bit of an even stretch, and just get them in there for your t-shirts nice and tight. We'll even them out later when we're attaching. The benefit of your double thread, especially in really long stretches, is if you snap a thread, which is likely to happen if you're gathering, say, a really full woven skirt, you don't have to go back and start from scratch. Because you know how that when you worked and worked and worked that large woven skirt and your thread snaps and you're just out of luck, you got to start all over again. If you have a backup thread line, you don't have to do that, which is great. You hope that doesn't happen, but as a just in case, it's a good backup. So in our case, we're going to go ahead and attach this sleeve then. And for the Cecilia, what we want to do is work from your flat portions first. So what I recommend is starting here at the armhole and laying in a couple pins right up through the curve. And I would do that on both sides. So then come at it this other side here and do the same. And I wandered my pins away, otherwise I'd show you that. And then once you have those 2 sides secured, you're just going to go ahead and disperse out your gathers around the remaining part of the sleeve cap. So you'll do that until they look even, they look right for you. This is one situation where I do overpin. I tend to be a chronic underpinner, but better with gathers to overpin than underpin. So you're going to kind of work it, and if it's like, oh, I really pulled that out too far, then go ahead and pull your bobbin threads back in and then start to work it out all over again. What you'll do next is make sure you've moved your sewing machine from the gathering stitch to your regular stitch length that you're going to use when you sew on knits. And I'm showing just a straight stitch here, but a zig on a knit you want to stretch, so like a zigzag, a lightning stitch, whatever you use for your machine, or a serger if you're using that. Then you're going to go ahead and lay your stitch in at 3/8 inch. And you can see here, hopefully, that this is my permanent stitch. So it runs right in between the 1/4 and the 5/8. So what that does is having your two stitching lines, one, gives you the backup in case you have a thread snap, and two, helps keep those gathers nice and secure all the way until you have your permanent stitch down. So that when you flip it over, your gathers are right where you left them. They're not slipping and sliding while you stitch. Now you are going to have that stitch line, that basting line that we put in at 5/8 exposed on the outside. That's okay, that's just a temporary stitch. We didn't back stitch that. We didn't put it back, it's a short stitch. So sometimes they'll pull right out. Don't force it if it doesn't, or you're gonna have a mess. But go ahead and pull out your awl or your seam ripper or whatever you use and just pull this stitch. You can do the same on that inside one, or just trim it down, whatever works for you. It's inside here. Normally I'll have this edge serged, so in that case you're gonna zip that right off anyway. But obviously you want to pull the exposed one. You want to be really careful that your permanent stitching line doesn't run over your basting stitching line. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time removing this stitch, and you'll more likely to pull in to your seam line. So just make sure when you're sewing that you're going to hit in between those lines and you're not stitching over the top of any of them, because you do want to remove your basting stitches once your sleeve is in place. And that is how you get a really nice, evenly dispersed gather.